Free Press Book Club. My name is Erin Lebar. I am an audience engagement manager at the Free Press, and I'm also your book club admin. I'll do a round of introductions. So we'll start with Ben Sigurdson, the books editor at the paper. We have Daniel Baer joining us from McNally tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, our author, Mitch Toews of Pinching Zwieback. I've been practicing our book for November. Before we continue, I just want to acknowledge that the Free Press and McNally Robinson are on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Our meeting will go as it always does. We will throw it to Daniel to do an introduction, and then Mitch will do a reading, and then Ben will kick off the Q&A. Thank you, everyone who sent your questions. We have a lot to work with this time, so super pumped about that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the next book pick at the end. So with that, I will throw it over to Daniel.
Awesome. Good evening, and thank you everyone again for having me over here, Erin, Ben, and Mitchell. I'm really excited to do this. Like you said, my name is Daniel Baer, and I'm an event facilitator at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Super excited to be here tonight for this month's book club meeting. Mitchell Toews has placed stories in 113 literary journals, anthologies, and contests since 2016. A three-time Pushcart nominee, Mitch was a finalist in the following major contests: the 2021 Writers' Union of Canada Short Prose Competition for Emerging Writers, the 2022 Humber Literary Review Canada-wide Creative Nonfiction Contest, the 2022 J.F. Powers Prize for Short Fiction in the U.S., and the 2023 Dave Williamson National Short Story Competition. Now, this can also be found in the author's bio in the back of the book. And tonight we'll be discussing this month's book and Toews' latest work, Pinching Zwieback. Pinching Zwieback is a compilation of short stories set in the fictional Manitoba town of Hartplaats and follows the lives of the Zayan family, starting from the family's humble Mennonite beginnings in the late 1800s South Russia, all the way to the present-day Manitoba, Canada. Because of this familial tie, the stories in Pinching Zwieback make the book read like a novel, as the book also states, lending each chapter and character their own unique voice and experience in their shared community. Mitchell Toews' writing takes us on a ride that mirrors the prairie life itself. Very familiar, yet at the same time, deep, vibrant, and so full of life. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's author, Mitchell Toews.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming out on this November evening. Greetings from Treaty 1 and 3 land and the home of the Métis Nation. I am really pleased to be here and to have, I understand there's lots of reader questions, and I'm eager to get to those. But before that, I'll read a little bit from the book, from Pinching Zwieback. This is the story, The Grittiness of Mango Chiffon, on page 141. And I'll read from the beginning of the story. It comes from a historical context in which, in the early 70s, it was all right for girls to wear miniskirts to school, but blue jeans, particularly ones that were deemed to be too tight, were verboten. So that's the context of this story. The Grittiness of Mango Chiffon. Oh, those squinty little eyes. I'll never forget the look of them. Like the night she found tobacco crumbs in my baseball jacket pocket. One night out of many when she had the goods on me and lowered the boom. My mom loved her cliches, and despite sounding like an episode of TV's Mannix, her message was always clear. Crystal. She spread the brown tobacco flakes out on a white napkin under our dining room table's 100-watt bulb. Matt, I thought you told me you did not smoke, she said, her finger pointing at the damning evidence. Her voice was calm, level as wet cement. Justina was her name, Justy for short, and well named she was. She was justice personified, relentless and forthright, and 5'2". The clock ticked on the mantel, sounding just as nervous as I was. Thought you were an abstainer, she added, breaking the near silence like a firm, light rap on the skin of ice topping a bucket of water. For this, she used her secret weapon, a large English vocabulary, a second lexical ordinance to complement her mastery of Low German. You mess with the bull, she'd say, ignoring the gender incongruence, but concentrating instead on her film noir delivery. You get the horns. She was rail thin, but each length of her was oddly punctuated with a jutting joint that reminded me of an ink blot on an otherwise smooth, straight line. Wrists, elbows, hips, and narrow shoulders, each clenched like a knot in a rope. She was slightly stooped, though not tall, and the shape of her back foretold of a hump that would appear in her last years. Her voice was gravelly from cigarettes, but the gruffness I heard could have been more a reflection of what she said, far more John Wayne and Tommy Douglas than the feminine icons of the day. She may have been quoting the Voice of Women movement, but it sounded like the voice of Bogart Humphrey. Mother wore modern tight-fitting slacks and knit sweaters. Her hair was bobbed short, and she had an affection for hats. The shelves of our closets were bulging with koptich, brimmed, knit, peaked, and proud. They rested in neat rows awaiting their day in the sun. Clothes and their meanings, implicit and explicit, were important to her. Her flamboyant style, and by extension that of her children, was her trademark, and it stood out in contrast to the staid fashion in our conservative town. Clothes, not surprisingly, were at the heart of another memorable incident, one of my favorites in a wardrobe holding many such misadventures, when my sister, Edith, got in trouble at the high school. I recall it just so, partly witnessed and partly imagined. I remember the event as if I had been there filming the whole thing. The Justy Zayn story, a TV documentary. I suppose our school principal from that time remembers it too, but for him, more like watching The Nature of Things, the moray eel, dangerous when provoked. The Hartplatz Ministerial Association had, way back in 1960, decreed that it was improper for girls to wear pants to high school. It was skirts or dresses, full stop. Now, while Americans walked on the moon, in Hartplatz, other matters took precedence. When the Arctic air arrived in Manitoba that January and the mercury hunkered down at 30 below with a gusting wind that licked the frozen ground, my mom rebelled. She stood her ground, also frozen, and pushed back against the all-male HMA board of directors and their hatchet man, Principal Reimer. Foolishness, she said, exhaling a bluish stream of smoke toward the kitchen ceiling. She peered out of the frosted window as snow devils wound curlicue trails on the plowed field across the road from our house. The wind heaved with a grunt against our bungalow, managing only the slightest quiver, registered by a timorous symbol in the cupboard where the once-a-year crystal dishes sat. This will not stand, she assured the whimpering dishes and the cutlery, cookware, and condiments. I'm sure she saw the HMA board members in her mind's eye as she entered Ween's dress shop for the smart set later that day. She marched in with a purposeful stride, Edith in tow. In her agitated state, Mum must have been mentally targeting them. Their bleary staring eyes, their balding heads, and their jowly neck wattles, overhanging starched shirt collars. She visualized their cocksure frowns of disapproval, using that image to hone her resolve. Curtly, and without a second thought, she blinked them away, took a portion of her summer vacation war chest money, and bought Edith a proper lady's pantsuit in a pastel yellow. The suit jacket hung mid-length, mid-thigh. That is at least as long as those crazy miniskirts, and those are allowed, Mum seethed. The pants had a tasteful loose fit and sharp, dressy creases down the front and back of the leg. They sported modest bell bottoms. What's wrong with that? She said to Edith with revolutionary zeal. Undergirded by a pair of double thick leotards, Edith would be warm as bread from the oven on her half-mile trek to school and back. But Edith resisted, protesting. I'll just get in trouble. I'll get sent to Principal Reimer's office in my first class. Guaranteed. I'll stop there.
Sure. Oh, that was great. Love that story too. Where should I start? Why don't we start with how this collection came to be, how long it took you to bring it together, and just sort of when it like what it was like sort of figuring out, when it seemed like enough pieces to be the complete package.
I started off back in Chilliwack, where we lived at the time, writing short stories in my free time, and I at some point reached the tolerance level, my personal tolerance level, of being able to send it to one of my buddies and say, tell me, if this is absolute, And so
How long ago was that you started?
that would have been in 2015, something like that.
Okay. Yep.
And so he gave me a little bit of encouragement, and he was a frank person, and so I knew I was somewhat good to go, and so away I went. And I didn't know anything about the industry. I knew that I wanted to write. I had read quite a lot, and I really had a strong desire to keep going, but I didn't know how to get going. So it seemed to me that I had for a long time, I had subscriptions to the one that I remember was Literary Review. So I would get monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly installments of collections of short stories, mostly from the States and the UK, and some Canadian writers. And so that seemed like a path that I could take if I could get stories submitted in literary journals. And so that's what I did for the next many years until I brought it to Matt Jodrey at Bay Press, and he surprised me with a yes. So that spanned about back to 2019.
Wow, fantastic. And you sort of talk about reading these different stories in literary journals and what have you. And obviously there are loads of very well-respected short story writers out there. I mean, thinking about this as short stories, I guess. For the time being, we can shift gears later, but who would you consider to be among some of your literary influences when it comes to writing shorter fiction like this?
Well, okay, in terms of short fiction, first of all, I'd say that probably the single book that had the greatest influence on me and that made me love short stories more than ever would be the Nick Adams stories by Ernest Hemingway. And so he's a terrific short story writer in lots of different ways, and he cut his teeth in journalism, as lots of people know, and so I think that that active attempt to keep things brief and fairly tight is something that I could aspire to, something I needed to aspire to because I wasn't naturally built that way necessarily, brevity that is. So that was a big one. There's a guy named Brees DJ Pancake, an unusual name from the mountains in the Carolinas, and he's also just a profoundly and dramatically great short story writer. O. Henry is often quoted by lots of people, and all of the great writers that took on the short form. I think I've found inspiration in some of their work. Flannery O'Connor is another terrific one, and the short stories that come out of Canada obviously are terrifically important to me too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when pulling these stories together, how do I ask this? I guess what came first, sort of the overall collection and how it was going to fit together, or were there just little stories and suddenly you realized that this is part of a bigger thing and that it's moving in that direction for a full-length manuscript?
Well, again, I let my ignorance lead the way. So I put together what I thought were my best stories, ones that had, got somewhere in a contest or had just got published, simply enough. And so I sent those in as a mansion of many apartments, I think is the quote that we used on the book cover. And so kind of got silence out of that at first. And then when I had a chance to talk with the publisher and toss some ideas around, then this thought of maybe putting it into a themed collection, and did I have enough work to fit that master plan? And I did. And plus we modified some of the stories a little bit to make them to fit more seamlessly into that flowing narrative that the collection has. So that's how that came together. And then it was once we got to that point where, you know, I was rewriting stories for the collection, then it was definitely getting pretty exciting.
Okay. And did you find that the momentum sort of took off from there, that you once you sort of had a bit of a direction in terms of where you wanted to take it, where they wanted you to take it, that the ideas started coming more quickly, or were there stumbling blocks, or?
Oh, there was definitely stumbling blocks because there were some pretty major structural changes in the stories. So that's always tricky, that, you know, did you get all the tense changes? Did you get all the, you know, changing when you change a character from a man to a woman, for instance, things like that. But I think I got sort of carried along with the momentum of two terrific editors, more than two, but two that I worked with directly, and Matt Jodry, it was his inspiration, I think, to make it almost like a cinematic kind of a thing, you know, a movie where you go back and forth, future to past and to the present. And so that using the stories as that part of that template, then it became interesting. So we as the people putting the book together were interested to see the outcomes as much as the readers would eventually be. So that was definitely a good thing.
Well, that sort of leads into one other question I have before maybe I'll throw it to someone else to ask some questions as well. But you know, I'm always curious with, you know, a series, especially a series of connected stories, about the order. I mean, there is a relatively chronological sort of underpinning to it, and obviously the last couple of stories, you would never put them anywhere else in the book because it just wouldn't make sense. But you know, was there any sort of jockeying for position with the rest? It's like sort of like when a musician writes an album, right? You have to sort of sequence things in the order that you think is the right way in which things should proceed. So what was that process like for you? And I guess it was probably partially for you and partially for the publisher, I would think.
Yeah, I think that we reached a point fairly quickly where all of us were in agreement with the big pieces of the puzzle that we had placed and the order that they were in. And then it was just a matter of jockeying the deck furniture kind of into the right spot. So it wasn't as contentious as it might have been to get those last few order decisions made. The big pieces fell into place relatively easy.
Gotcha. Why don't I throw it to one of you to ask a question or two while we're at it.
I'll piggyback a little bit off of what Ben said there too about like the chronology of the stories and some of those characters. I really loved getting to read the characters as the family tree went, because what I was really looking forward to seeing, like Hart's perspective and then Matt's as we go, is how their perspectives change based on, or when they look at their parents. I mean, you can really tell what's going on when you get to Matt's stories later on about how his parents were and what they grew up to be like further as he aged. And same thing with Diedrich. Diedrich is my favorite character. Love that character. But going into it, did you already know that you were going to include some like additional characters not in the Zayn family? Or was that one of those things that just popped up that you felt needed to be added into the book just to add that extra perspective for those timelines?
In my memory, that those decisions didn't come out of a clear direction that we saw as an obvious choice to make, but instead it was a bit like when you're putting together a story that you think, well, I need some action here, or I need a scene change, or I need a new character to come in and breathe some life into it, and to maybe bring in this element that the story needs anyway. And this would be a good way to shake things up a little. So it was a little bit sort of that, sort of a chef, maybe looking for flavors or something like that. But then what happens, what always happened, and that is that we kind of fell in love with those secondary characters, and they became more major, and they were welcome to it because it was good for the overall product to have that happen. Lenny would be a good example of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any consideration ever to sort of like doing sort of a follow-up sort of spin-off in one of these directions with one of these characters? Or maybe we can talk about that later near the end in terms of what you're working on right now.
Sure. I would just say briefly that I think that would be a lot of fun, and I've been thinking of other Mennonite foods.
Well,
What is good with Zwieback?
what has the reaction been like from members of the Mennonite community that you've spoken to? Has anyone this is sort of parlays into a reader question, which was, has anyone from the community seen him or herself in these characters?
Well, I put it right on the cover that it is made up. It is fictional. It's auto-fiction, so it comes primarily out of my experiences. And then I do that wonderful thing with the dice, and I roll them, and the facts change, and the story takes on its own life, and then it becomes the reader's. So it's not even mine anymore. But yeah, I think some people have named some of the characters that were in my family and in my extended group of friends, and so on. They are able to identify some of them as coming from those sources. But a lot of those sources, as great individuals as they are also cross types and typical of certain people that are going to be in certain circumstances and certain times, and that I may have witnessed. So there's no hard copies made in any of those characters.
Gotcha. One other jumping over to another reader question that I also sort of had an addendum to. There's mention in the book of needing to be brave when one's faith is failing, and the reader would like you to elaborate. Has this theme been explored in any of your other work? Will it be explored in a future publication? And my add-on question would be, is this something you've had to grapple with yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, my experiences in Steinbach, in Mennonite life, in the faith, are difficult, and so I have a different perspective of that than some of the readers might have, but it didn't matter that much, I don't think, when I saw people doing extremely courageous things that had that put them in a tenuous position with respect to their religion. And I think one of the most beautiful examples that I can think of is in the Steinbach gay pride parades, which only started within the time that I've been writing, sort of that time period, when, let's say, older people, grandmas and grandpas, who omas and opas, who have a kid that is marching in that parade, and they are putting aside a lifetime of learning and faith and belief, and saying, well, I don't care about that right now because that's my grandkid walking down that street, and away I go. So that's a kind of thing that I would love to write some more about, and I have some stories that I'm working on that kind of ring that bell a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that feeling definitely comes through in a couple of the stories, especially later in the book when as Matt gets older and is looking at his own grandchildren and what have you. Yeah, Erin and Daniel, anything jump in with
Sure.
whatever?
So one of the readers and I had the exact same question, and we wanted to ask about the cover art.
Yeah.
Because when I first saw this book and there's like a rooster and a tailcoat or something, I'm like, I don't know what I'm getting into here. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the cover art and how that came to be.
Well, I sometimes wrongly fancy myself having a little bit of artistic talent. So, and I'm an easy volunteer when it comes to ideas. So I sent in this really ugly cover concept drawing of a chicken. It was a handsome chicken that had laid an egg, but it wasn't an egg. It was a Zwieback bun.
Oh,
That's,
so this, okay, just
Yeah.
to stop you 1 second. At the back of the book is a QR code. And if you click on the, or
yes.
you scan the QR code, it'll bring up not only the review in the Free Press, but also the preliminary art. Let me see if I can hold it up. Oh, no. We both got it pulled up here, ready to go. Anyway, carry on. Sorry. I couldn't resist.
You can read me my rights now if you want.
No, that's, I mean,
Anyway, that was kind of a really early. That's one of the rockets that blew up after it took off the launch pad. And but chickens are important to Mennonites. They're easy to get a flock of them going when you move to a new place. They provide you with protein readily on a daily basis. Their feathers can be used. They're kind of really extendable resources to have if you're a traveling people, getting booted across different continents. So chickens is a nice kind of a allegorical hook to hang your hat on. And that was part of it. There are other great Mennonite books that have chickens on the covers, and so that was maybe a little bit of an elbow nudge along the way. And I had some terrific graphic designers working behind the scenes that put that rooster into top and tails, I think it's called, right? And that's, I guess, is a way to say that the Mennonite people, if they're symbolized by that rooster, are changing as they go throughout their evolution, and all of a sudden they're dressing up and going to the bank. So
I like that under this, it says rejected cover art for the book. Above is one of 2 cover art design options for the final publication. Ultimately, the author decided to go in the other direction. Is that entirely true? Was it entirely your decision, or were they like, you know what, we like this, but we're just going to riff on it a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, they were kind and generous in maybe seeing that for someone to put something that egregious on paper, that they must have some deep feelings that are worth exploring. I don't know.
They sent you a number for a good therapist or something. Daniel, you want to jump in with that?
Yeah, definitely. Somebody had a similar question to what I was thinking while I was reading as well. That this first one that we have here, the game of baseball plays a big part in the stories. Is it Gruta Pita? Gruta Pita? Was it?
Gruta Pita. Yeah.
Gruta Pita. In the dim light beyond the fence. A wonderfully written baseball scene is when Hart plays in an imaginary game while waiting to deliver his Zwieback in the story Nothing to Lose. Metaphors and illustrations related to baseball are found throughout your stories. In The Worth of Sparrows, for example, a character has a Louisville Slugger bat mounted in his truck. Well, why did you include all these references to baseball? And why is the game important to you?
I don't know. I say somewhere that baseball is by design egalitarian. It's meant to take bias and privilege and unfairness, I guess, out of the game. And it shows up in the language of baseball, right? Fair and foul, for example. And baseball was the first thing that, as a wee little boy, I chose, and I got to feel as though I had some competency in baseball. And, I was never a guy that had anything more than warning track power. I had more warning track power in football and hockey than I did in baseball, but still. And so I don't know, I have a soft spot in my heart for baseball. I think it's somehow kind of poetic. You play in a park, it's so beautiful. Kinsella has written many passages that are really make you feel strongly about baseball. And there's so many writers that have done a great job with baseball that I don't know. I just felt like I was one in a long line, and I was happy. And I'm happy to have action in my stories. And baseball is a transporter into a world of action, without you don't have, like, there's fighting in the book too. Baseball's a little bit more like ballet is to boxing, right? And so I think that's why baseball fell in. And I know something about baseball, so I can chew up a page or two with
Right, what you know. That's interesting. That reader question references Hart playing the imaginary game, and it made me think, in listening to that question again, about the final story where Matt is also playing an imaginary game of a very different kind, where he's sort of picking these pieces out of consciousness, that, or things that are happening around him, and sort of they're being injected into this game that he's playing in his mind. That was a fascinating sort of connection that you made. That's not a question, just an observation. I really enjoyed that. So was that intentional, or sort of in the back of your mind, or?
Yeah, I guess I always have this puzzlement about, when you're asleep and in your dream, there's suddenly a barking dog, and you wake up and invariably the neighbor's dog is loose and is barking outside of your window. And so your brain never turns off. And as a writer, I find this so often that I'm puzzling over, how am I going to end this story, or what's this character going to do? Would he actually do something that bad? And I'm thinking about stuff like that. I wake up in the morning and my head is all filled with new ideas about that thing that I was puzzling on the night before. So your brain is alive and active and working, even though it's taking that rest period. And it's just, I don't know, it's a fascinating thing. If you extrapolate that, as I kind of do in the last story, what happens in your last dream is a kind of a existential bit of wonderment, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a lovely thought, and sort of a big question.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's and lovely imagery throughout that story as well. And as I was reading it, I was just thinking to myself, he's not taking Matt where I think he's taking him, is he? And well, I mean, no spoiler alerts be damned. I mean, you did. So I mean, by this point, if anyone's watching, they've probably read the book, and so it's not really a spoiler. Plus, the book came out last year, so too bad.
We don't abide by spoiler rules in this book club.
No, it's
If you
true.
haven't read the book, it's your own fault.
Yeah, there was one time where I was sort of humming and hawing, trying to figure out how to talk about something that happened near the end of the book, and a couple of readers let me have it afterwards, and or viewers, and rightfully so, because it's like, well, we're here, we obviously read the book, so that's good. That shows that people did their homework. Sort of a couple. Here's one sort of just not toss off, but sort of unrelated reader question. If you were to publish this collection again, would you include a recipe for making Zwieback in? Can
I interject briefly here on that one?
Yes.
Mitch actually emailed me the recipe for the Zwieback. I have it. I'm going to post it in the comments of the YouTube video after, so that everyone can come back to the video and it will be there in perpetuity. So sorry to steal the spotlight on that one, but Mitch is way ahead of you. Already sent me a recipe.
Okay. Well, that's good. And I would suggest maybe in the email going out for the next book club too, we could maybe even include it in that.
I certainly can. Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, never mind. Problem solved. And now everyone knows what they're going to be attempting to make over the holidays this year.
Yeah.
Let me just give a quick provenance for that Zwieback recipe too. That that comes from Steinbach Bakery, the place that I grew up in Steinbach as a kid. And there was lots of relatives involved in that over the years, many. And so my uncle Eldon Eldon Toews had held on to that recipe for many years, the old Steinbach bakery recipe. And he gave it to my cousin Doug Toews. And Doug he was the kitchen tester. He's a more prolific baker than me. I'm a sourdough guy, but not the regular dough. And Doug did some tweaking to the old recipe and figured out some of the intricacies of it. Anyway, so that's in that recipe, but it is the original ingredients that came from Steinbach Bakery through the 60s and 70s and 80s.
Not to get too hung up on various rural Manitoba baked goods, but is it one of those things where everyone has their own recipe and everyone's recipe is the best recipe?
Yeah. In the copy of the Treasury of Mennonite Cooking that we have, I think we have 2 of them, but in the one that is the most dog-eared, I think there are 7 Zwieback or 6 recipes and 1 entire page devoted to Zwieback lore.
Okay.
So again,
as someone who's half Icelandic, everyone's Alma makes the best Vina tarta, and no 2 recipes are exactly the same. So I know exactly where you're coming from.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, enough about baked goods. I must be getting a little peckish for
hungry now.
Yes, exactly. Does someone want to jump in with anything before I hop on to another question here? Nope. Okay.
Oh, actually, if I can, one question that I'm very, very interested in that one of the readers asked, because I couldn't stop thinking about it when I read it, and I was really excited for this one today too. Why did Rosie let Matt take Tim through the narrowing, given her concerns about Tim's mental health and behavior?
Yeah, and that's right at the tear point between all of them, right? And I'm finding as I age as a grandfather that I remember different tensions between my parents or Jan's parents, my wife's parents, and our kids, and decisions about how you do this. And the older generation sometimes has that tendency to say, well, that's the way we did it and we turned out okay and stuff like that. And the new generation says, well, no, that's what I wanted to avoid doing. I had sworn to myself I was going to do that differently. And so there's a lot of emotion in that. And there's a lot at stake too, because some of these decisions are particularly tenuous, and you have to be careful with what you're doing. So my dad used to always talk about healthy tension being good. It didn't always feel good when you're battling things through, but you came out with a better decision in the end because you had sort of pre-tested it. You had heated it with your passions as you argued over it. And so that's a couple of those things, I think. In the end, maybe there's cause, and maybe I was being a bit of a champion for this. There's cause to have some reasonable risk in a child's life, but as Rosie explains to her dad, wait a minute, I know some stuff, and Dad better be listening. So
again, that sort of harkens back to one of the earlier stories. I'm not. It was the story with where they build the very fast slide, and that sort of element of risk for a child as well. What's the name of that story? Sorry.
Is it Fast and Steep?
Steep and Fast.
Right. I thought it was right at the beginning, but it's near the beginning. Anyway, yeah, but it really the narrowing and really jumped out as a story where, like all of the stories have some elements of conflict and some, whether it's, a fight or a baseball game or a slide or whatever, but that one really just sort of was just incredibly stressful because you could sort of see what was inevitably going to happen, and that they were going to go through the tunnel. And then it was just sort of like, well, what is something going to happen, or is it just going to be fine? Are they going to have like maybe a nice an emotional connection or something? And then, then suddenly they sense before they even hear the train, and you're like, oh no.
I think that the corollary is between risk is often trust. So come on, it's fine. You can walk across the bridge. Well, you have to have the element of trust, but you're still taking a risk. You may be wrong, so it's a really great implement to use in a short story, because it ramps up the tension really fast, and it makes you think about all those times when you've been in a position either to offer trust to someone, and then they're in the position then to make the choice whether they take it or not.
Yeah. Or maybe if you're of my generation, you've just watched Stand By Me a couple too many times. When they're running across the bridge, the train is chasing them. It definitely brought back memories of that. But I really thought it was just so well done, so beautifully done. Is there a narrowing in that sort of Whitechapel-ish area? Or are you not allowed to say because it's sort of
No, I did go to my railroad buddy and ask him so I could get some idea about the speeds of a freight train and going downhill and uphill and things like that. But there is not an actual spot that has that. There are places, certainly when I just finished driving from Jessica Lake to Kentville, Nova Scotia with my son-in-law.
Wow.
And the dog, and so we saw a lot of places where the highway had been blasted out, and the railway track, which is so often parallel to the Trans-Canada, was blasted out as well. And a lot of those places would fit the scenario in the narrowing, where there wouldn't be room for a moose to be in the margin there.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think if
So we're getting pretty close to time.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if each of you have one final question you want to end with, or we can just go right to the "What are you working on now?" question, which is always popular.
Daniel?
Honestly, I don't have any further questions, because a lot of the readers did ask ones that I also had. I was also super curious about the cover too, so I'm glad we got that answer.
Well, there was one more question from readers. Try and sort of paraphrase it. I'm of Mennonite background, but don't see myself as Canadier nor Russlander. I'm probably saying these totally wrong. Having arrived in the 50s after the war. I grew up in Winnipeg and had very little contact outside the city, as all close relatives were in the city or in Vancouver. I find the stories and characters somewhat stereotypical to what I was brought up to believe about the areas of Steinbach, Winkler, Altona. How or why did these assumptions develop, and was it encouraged either from one side or both sides? So that's some good preamble and an interesting question too. I'm interested to hear yours.
Well, I think that the Canadier Russlander division, in some places, it seems to be a very important factor and something that is still current and cogent with people right down the line. In other places, a writer in Abbotsford told me not that long ago that, oh, we don't worry about that. Whether you arrived here in 1874 or you arrived here in the 1920s doesn't make any difference to us, because a lot of people moved here, had stopped worrying about that factioning and that division between the people. I mean, there was lots to that. There's the whole those who are first will be last kind of a twang to it, I guess, and resentments get built up very easily over money and things like that, and more than that too. It's a complicated thing. And then the rural urban Mennonite setup, I guess, is kind of dynamic, is what it is also a little bit hard to understand sometimes and tricky. And I had it within both my Toews family and my Harder family. It's my mom's side, and so there are obvious divisions. In our case, it was almost always brought down to the level of humor, and so it was okay. But there always were this kind of stereotypical divisions between people who lived in Winnipeg and lived in rural Manitoba. So, and even, you know, there's many subdivisions to that. Mennonites have no end of subdivisions. So you can have, you know, farm people versus town people, and on it goes.
Sounds like a topic for a dedicated Zoom of its own, but it also sounds like it gives you lots of potential fodder for whatever you're working on next. And maybe you'd like to give us some hints as to what you're working on next.
Well, a novel has been completed.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And it's sitting in its original manuscript state, and I think it has a chance to maybe get an at bat, but and it's different than this. It's definitely a contiguous novel. Takes place in Manitoba, partly in a town, partly in the city of Winnipeg. And partly in the bush, in the boreal forest. And it has one beta reader, Mennonite guy lives in Los Angeles now, said it was Fargo with Mennonite accents.
Cool.
So I'm hoping to work on that down the road. Another collection of short stories has been put together, and now that's probably will come after the novel, if the novel comes first. And that also it has some more Hartplaat stories, and the Zayn family is represented there again, not as much though, and it branches out and it broadens to non-Mennonite stories and stories where Mennonite characters are maybe a little bit more like moons than earths.
Okay.
Sort of.
Well, that's I mean, that's fantastic. You obviously you've really sort of seems like you've turbocharged your output and your ability to sort of pull things together. And you know, is it's sort of a nice thing to hear that, you know, not, you know, someone who is, let's say, you know, not, you know, in their 20s or something like that can really kind of kickstart something that they're so passionate about, and that you've clearly done a great job with here, and that I'm sure the, you know, other output will be equally as good or better. So congratulations. That's fantastic that you're working on all of that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've learned to harness fear in its powerful side.
Well, thank you all so much for leading this meeting. I always find the questions from readers and responses from the writer just make me appreciate the work so much more. So thank you so much, Mitchell, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just quickly, I want to mention our next book, The Last Secret. You guys have cried out for historical fiction, so we are doing historical fiction. We don't have a meeting in December because of holidays and whatnot, so we will be meeting for this until January 28th, I believe is the date. For those of you who snagged tickets to our Meet, Mingle, and Be Merry event next week on Monday, please come up to me and say hello. I think Ben will be there as well.
But don't come up. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. Come and by all
But if you're a regular question submitter or giveaway winner, just tell me your name. I promise I'm going to know who you are. But yeah, I really hope to see some of you there. And otherwise, I hope you have an amazing last bit of the year, and we will see you in 2025. Holy cow. Have a good night, everybody, and thank you again so much.
Thank you
Thanks
so
all.
much. Thanks, Mitchell. Thanks, Daniel.
So much,
Thanks,
Mitchell.
Dave.
Thank you
Thanks,
guys.
Dave.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Thank you, Shane.